Hello everybody, my name is Bright Rose and welcome back to Minecraft here on the ZombieCraft Patreon server. And you may recognize from my previous videos just where we are. We are in the fair portion of the April build celebration, and we are here today because it is a wonderful example of what I am going to be messing around with and talking about today, and that is Armour Stands. So it is only fitting that we are here on the Patreon server of the king of armor standing, Zombie Cleo themselves, because the ZombieCraft server is a amazing resource, a just brilliant example of all the many types of applications that the Armour Standing book allows you to do. And we're going to go over a couple of little bits here and there today, just looking at some of the amazing statues that are dotted around the Ren Fair build today. Because whilst I would love to take you to go and see some of the other builds that are in the Ren Fair as well as around the server, I'm going to keep those hidden for now, because at some point Cleo will be streaming the content of the Ren Fair, so I don't want to spoil anything for other people's builds. But you've already seen these builds. If you've watched the build celebration series that I did for this build, you've already seen all of this, so it's not a spoiler to show you exactly what's going on here. But let's start by having a look around at some of the various armor stands that we've got dotted around here, and I'll show you exactly what I mean in terms of how they've been utilized in the various different ways. And then we'll get on to what I like to do, how I like to use armor stands to bring a little bit of life and movement, as it were, into the Minecraft builds. So let's take a look around at some of the ones that we've got in this area. When it comes down to the different type of armor stand work that you can do, I think there are a number of generally broad categories of the different sorts of practical ways that you can use armor stands to bring more life, more detail to the world. And here are a couple of examples. We have behind me one of the just basic armor stand poses that you have that adds this little character into this world with a little bit of motion, a little bit of action as they wave to someone who is entering into this little stall. We also have the various heads, antlers and things like that placed upon the various counters and walls in here, which is another example of how armor stands bring that little bit more detail, that little bit more life into a build. And this is just a easy, simple example of what that is, because you can do much more detail. You could, if you want, place bunting and flags and flowers and things like that across the front of this shop front here, and you could do that with armor stands, and it would add a lot more detail that you just cannot get in the basic vanilla game. But what is here, I would say, is a very simple and quick way to add a little bit more life into a build that the armor stand book allows you to do. A more complicated version of that, but most definitely on the same lines, would be things like these dancers around this maypole here that my good friend Rain put together, where they are the basic poses as we saw with Little Shop Assistant over there, but with the addition of various leather items placed on multiple armor stands to create these beautiful flowing dresses. And there's another example that you can see behind me of these two dancers, and an even more detailed example being the little fairy wings on this child down here. It just adds that little bit more detail, that little bit more interest into the build. We also see it with these musical instruments, again, that Rain did here, with the violin and with this big guitar here. They just add this little bit extra detail you can't have in the game, beyond something like a block bench item, such as the ears that I'm currently wearing. And it just adds that little bit more interest, and that is the main thing that I think I'm going to be talking about in terms of Armour Stands and what I love about them, it adds that little bit more. It takes what would be just a series of builds and open areas into a more living, breathing world. With all of these dancers, you can run around here and you can imagine what's going on. You can imagine these people selling in these little stalls. You can imagine this parent and child dancing around to the music that's coming out from this band performing here on this stage. It just adds that little bit more life that just adds a wonderful element to the build. And of course, we have more complicated builds, such as this little roasting pig behind us here. And again, while some of this is replicable in vanilla, you can stick a pig head on some blocks like this and you could suspend them from string. Having these legs and things like that isn't really doable in vanilla. There's some things you can do, but this just adds it together. And a really amazing example of this sort of setup is what I'm going to show you next. Now, I've talked about these two little buildings before, and I've shown what the reaction was when the build celebration was done a few weeks back. But these two buildings done by Rain and Sani are just wonderful examples, again, of Armour Stands adding that little bit more interest. Here we have this beautiful, amazing stand work done here by Sani, with all these various leather goods hanging from this line here, and this custom framework done with these wooden trees, these blocks here, and it is just beautifully done. And again, we have this little leather worker here working away. It just brings this extra element of life and interest. And again, we can see it here in this room where we have this little forge working away here, where it's a seamless blend of the vanilla work of the room and these blocks and things like that here with the armor stand work that allows you to put these weapons and things like that. And of course, some of these are custom weapons that we have on the ZombieCraft server here, but without the armor stand you wouldn't be able to get details like this. And these little elements here that just turn this from a open space into a working room that you can feel when you walk in. For my own part, with my own little additions to this build, this is the sort of armor stand work that I really like doing. The bits that add a little bit of interest, a little bit more detail, and I'm going to use those words quite a lot, so I apologize if I get a bit repetitive with this. But it's these little elements that bring the life to the build in what otherwise would just be an open space. It creates this theme, this added element of the story to the build, and you can look at it just moving around this whole town square here. You can see each of these individual little areas. There are their own little stories, their own little interactions that are going on that just bring the entire build up and just make it so much nicer and better. Of course, in my own humble opinion, you may think it doesn't add anything at all, but this is what I love, and this is why I am on the ZombieCraft Patreon server, because I just love this style of building, and I don't think there is anywhere better to see this sort of thing than on this server. We find ourselves in the little pizza land area of the Ren Fair build, and this is a wonderful example of how I do armor stands, how I prefer to do armor stands, where we have all of these little figures just interacting and doing things like this, with the more subtle use of armor stands to continue on from the various people dotted around in this little area, in this scene. And then we have things like this guy behind us handing out the piece of pizza on the tray. Behind us here we have the two pizzas in the display cases, and the various utensils and things on the walls behind us. We also have this guy here opening his pizza box to get that delicious pepperoni pizza inside. Things that the Armour Stand mod allow us to add in this little bit more to the build, to create this scene, to tell the story of exactly what is going on in here. You can walk into this room and you don't need to be told what is happening. You can see it, you can live it, you can feel exactly what is going on in this room just by the visuals that have been created and enhanced by the use of Armour Stands. And again, that's what I really love and what you can get out of this mod. Moving on to something that I haven't yet shown on camera, we are at what is going to be the May build competition, and we have a few little details in this area where Armour Stands have been used to just enhance the vanilla build. So we have all these boxes and things like that in this storeroom, and then we have little bits like these tumbled down boxes here to my left on the screen, and these little bits of paper dotted around. With the use of Armour Stands, this just adds a little bit more of that detail and that life into this build. So you can come in here and instead of just seeing a very tight, narrow storeroom, you can see with these tumble down boxes that this maybe is a bit older, maybe a bit less used, it's a bit run down, and it tells that story, it conveys that feeling to you. Just by seeing it, you can make that connection and understand exactly what the theme, the feeling that you are supposed to get as you move into this area. And down below here are a few examples of that little bit more detailed build with Armour Stands that, whilst I don't normally do them, I've taken the option here to try and do a few more of the more complicated Armour Stand builds, because, you know, when the mood takes me, I can be convinced to do the ones that take a little bit longer to do. Normally, I get bored and wander off when things get a little bit too long or go on for too long, but, you know, occasionally I get the drive to try and do something with a little bit more detail. So let's go and take a quick look at what I've done already. It's not finished, but I'm going to avoid showing you the exact finished product down there, just because I want to save something for the build celebration. Down here in the dingy, dark basement underneath the abandoned warehouse above, we have this little area full of various horrors and cyberpunky ick of what's been going on down here. And again, these are some relatively simple little uses of the Armour Stand book to add blocks within blocks, which allow us to add things like this inside these glass blocks to make the appearance of things like jars and things like that. And again, it's just very simple and it's what I like adding. But then we have things like this behind us where, again, I don't do this stuff often, but occasionally I get that drive. So we have what is probably a more complicated build in the sense that it uses many Armour Stands, and quite frankly, I don't count how many Armour Stands are in this. Anybody that has an idea could probably, you know, come up with something of a guess as how many might be in this, but honestly, it doesn't greatly matter because I think I managed to get the overall look that I was going for here, and there is one or two little things I want to add on to this build to finish it off. But this is pretty much what I'm aiming for.